Everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my game week 36 transfer plans. There's only 3 weeks left in FPL. The goal at this point really is to hopefully somehow scrape a top 100k finish. I think I'm super far away from it, and I think decision-wise, a lot more needs to go my way. But we finally had a pretty okay week coming after game week 34, and having a pretty big setback there. So in 35, we made probably a couple wrong decisions. I don't think the O'Brien move was necessarily a wrong decision. The captaincy in hindsight, I believe, was a wrong decision just because Marmoush playing on the right was pretty awful to watch. He was the sort of top goal scorer in terms of market odds, and I think he made a lot of sense as a pick on paper, but it was very poor in terms of how the game actually played out and how he effectuated the game on that right wing position. Lots of the other sort of picks I think did well outside of Mo Salah. So the likes of Isak, the likes of Mbumo, and then people going, and fair play to people. Some people went Palmer, I've seen, some analytics people. Some other managers went Kevin De Bruyne, who made a lot of sense as well. With good minutes, he actually was a very strong pick. I just didn't actually have the route towards going to KDB because it really would have been through Palmer, and I wasn't considering that at all. Eze has come through extremely clutch for me. So, in totality, the game week was positive, but it's, not a significant enough green for me to be super happy. I ended up benching Nico Williams, which I think once again, it made sense on my expectation that Nottingham Forest were actually going to get crushed by Crystal Palace. And I feel like based on the chances that I saw Palace had within the game, I think logically that was the right decision. Clearly, Everton had also conceded 2 goals, whereas, well, not also, Nico Williams only conceded 1, but I think just looking at the chances from both games, probably a little bit unlucky on the Everton side. I think maybe that second goal was quite deserved, and they should have conceded probably 1 goal on average within that game, whereas I think Forest were quite lucky to just come off with conceding 1. The other 50-50 decision that I think clearly probably maybe in hindsight was a bad decision was that sort of Evan Nilsson to Clivert swing. I think just, week to week, we have always the pros, and I think when I look at my team here, this is a good example of sometimes you feel better about owning penalty takers, and Palmer and Eze is a good example of that. And I'm sure equally, a lot of people would have been upset if they owned Sar, for example, over Eze. And I think that's just FPL sometimes. Sar had plenty of chances, once again, in open play. Better chances that Eze had, better chances than Mateta had. Munoz had some great chances as well, but you can't always convert them. And so sometimes I feel like, yes, whilst Clivert did absolutely nothing with the Arsenal game and he was rightly subbed off, it's very hard to sort of look back and say it was so obviously a wrong decision. I think it's just, a bad swing in the sense that O'Brien was a bad swing, Clivert was a bad swing, and even Marmoush, I wouldn't say was a brutal swing because not many people had the major captaincy hauls. I think that was sort of lower effective ownership when it comes to some of the double-digit hauls, or even, let's say, Isak. So no real complaints there, but it's nice to have some of the players spring back a little bit of life within this team. And I think with the O'Brien transfer, really the idea was I'll still play O'Brien in 2 weeks' time versus Southampton at home. So that's part of the reason why I went for that transfer. You get that sort of net benefit over the next 4 games, and now there's only 3. When I look at my team now, I think I'm pretty happy with where it is at. I don't think it needs a transfer whatsoever. And so if I go to kind of my page in terms of how I set up my team, if information stays the same, I really think that I'm just going to be playing a team where I'm captaining Mbumo, probably vice captaining Salah in this case, or maybe Isak. With Marmoush, it's a tricky situation because I think this is a case where we just wait for leaks. I have no plans to go for Haaland. I have no interest in Haaland. I don't think Haaland's going to play significant minutes before an FA Cup final, just so that he can kind of play minutes versus Southampton instead. So when I look at my team, I think I'm very happy with Nico Williams, happy with Guardiola. Bit of a 50-50 type decision between Trippier and Ait-Nouri. Both players are at home, both players against some pretty competent level teams, respective to the level of defense that Newcastle and Wolves are. As far as O'Brien, he's actually got a really good match because Fulham have they've looked lethargic, I would say, on the attacking end of things, but it is still Everton away, and I do tend to like my home and away pieces. So unfortunately in this case it's going to be O'Brien at the back of the bench, and I think Ait-Nouri, someone that I'll definitely consider over the course of the week, because in open play he still looks extremely attacking, and that's a huge positive. It looked really good versus Man City as well. And then in the case of Trippier, I think one of the things that makes me want to bench Trippier potentially is just this angle that I have Palmer, and I'd probably like to back a result where maybe Palmer can do well. So I think it might not make sense on, let's say, potentially a clean sheets perspective, like the clean sheet odds and things, to back Newcastle, or rather to back Ait-Nouri over Trippier and Henderson over Pope. But that is something that I'm considering, sort of from an an outcome variability standpoint. It's unlikely that I'm going to have a good outcome mix with double Newcastle defense versus Palmer, but maybe I bet in either direction, and I could benefit a little bit there. So it'll be interesting, and I know Tottenham will rotate once again. So actually, it feels quite nice to potentially go for Henderson as well in this situation. So that's something I'm considering, but it's not going to cause me to use any transfers. I'm sure a lot of people in a bit more of a luxurious position than myself, having seen that I've just used one free transfer, I feel like a lot of people have the capacity to move into maybe double Nottingham Forest defense. I think that makes a lot of sense this week. You have another opportunity to target Leicester at home, and why would you not? They continue to look like an absolutely awful team, and that's pretty much what I have to say in terms of defense. I think some people can also consider maybe making a move towards Sells if they don't own him as well. I think a lot of our goalkeepers might have a pretty mediocre game, and I'm thinking about a lot of people who do own Martinez, who do own, let's say, the likes of Raya. Goalkeeper moves aren't super popular from time to time in FPL, but I think from a transfer plan perspective, if you have a goalkeeper with a bad fixture now and you're looking at Nottingham Forest's remaining fixtures, Sells actually seems like a really nice transfer that I think I would consider, given that Leicester at home really just is such an amazing fixture. In the midfield, when I look at it now, I think the captaincy is quite clear. I don't really have the capacity to move towards De Bruyne. I think Kluivert has worked out so wrong as a wildcard 30 pick, and probably to an extent, I suppose, is a skill issue bringing Kluivert, knowing that he had fatigue. But I really thought he was only going to play 1 week, and he's been very poor. Semenyo's done plenty good in that time. Rodgers has had some great hauls, and that's pretty much all I have to say. It's I think a bit unfortunate with Kluivert, but it's now in a position where I think Evan Nilsson's minutes are a bit more guaranteed compared to Kluivert, and that's something I'll have to take going forwards when it comes to sort of making that 50-50 call of playing Evan Nilsson versus Kluivert week to week. So in this situation, I'm benching Kluivert. I think Eze looks like an amazing hold, especially now that we know he's on penalties. How long is he going to be on penalties? I'm not sure, but having just scored a penalty, and I actually did feel like he was going to take penalties because, Eze had missed one, really shocker of a penalty with the Panenka. Then Mateta had missed one. So it felt like, that yo-yo was turning around into Eze's favor unless Sarr was somehow going to take. But Eze's he's taken a clean penalty. I think that's a huge plus for just keeping him up until the end of the season. I don't really see a need to move off of Eze up until game week 38, and I'll talk about that in my transfer plans. With Mbumo, he's just an easy hold. With Palmer, he could potentially also be a sell. In the case of Salah, I think he's boring, right? He's been flattering to deceive. He's still had some okay underlyings, nothing exceptional, and not leading the game per se, but non-penalty data, still some of the best in terms of midfielders game to game. He's still playing the minutes. And I think one of the biggest things about Salah when I look at him is, are there any other picks that I really want to go to? Not really outside of Bowen and KDB, but I think it's not worth the transfer. And ultimately, I see Salah as a wonderful pick as a captaincy in Game Week 38. So that's pretty much why I'm planning on keeping Salah. Now, when it comes to effective ownership within the forward line, I think as someone who's chasing, I know that Isak's effective ownership is close to 100%. So it does feel like one of those circumstances where by selling Isak, I might actually kind of increase, I suppose, the variance, both sides, right, in terms of how my outcomes will compete versus the rest of the field. And it does feel silly because I think Isak just is still a wonderful player, still on penalties. Minutes actually look quite good now. Eddie Howe has mentioned that he's a bit more fit than he was 3-4 weeks ago when he was dealing with a sort of groin injury. And I guess Marmoush is also in quite a precarious position because coming out of the Southampton game, I think regardless, Marmoush actually looks like probably a sell or someone that actually I would have no interest in playing going forwards. But I can also quite easily play a 3-5-2 as we move on. And maybe a transfer should not be used against Isak because he clearly will be, guaranteed to play good minutes, even though the fixtures are actually really tough. It's just that Newcastle has something to play for, whereas with City, they do have something to play for, but I wouldn't say Marmoush's minutes feel absolutely nailed. I think in the structure with Haaland being out, he still doesn't have nailed on minutes. And even if Haaland comes back, maybe they just move into the structure where he was sort of playing alongside Haaland in almost like a sort of double forward type formation. But I'm not so sure about his minutes, and I think he can just quite easily be a sell after Southampton. With Evan Nilsson and all the Bournemouth players, I'm resigned to holding them because the next two games aren't exceptional, but Game Week 38 is there, and I'll be maybe 2 transfers ahead of other people because a lot of people do not own a single Bournemouth player. And so when I look at it now, I think I've got a pretty strong defense that can rotate well until the end of the season. The rest of my transfers will be spent towards midfielders. On this week, however, I just don't see the need to use a transfer unless, of course, we come into a circumstance where we have to sell Marmoush. And so this is a perfect segue into how we plan for the rest of this game week. So I'm back here in game week 36 with the hub tool. Nice to see that we're on 91% regardless. Optimizing the team doesn't do too much. It does recommend Salah captaincy. I am very much sort of pro Mbumo captaincy myself. I can't see myself going for Salah as a captaincy or a vice captaincy, so I really think he'll just be Mbumo, target a relegation team, and hope for the best in this sort of circumstance here. I really think that the relegation teams are exceptionally bad, and that should be captured. But that's my thoughts in terms of playing Mbumo. When it comes to Marmoush, I think the interesting thing is, let's say if I binned him off, who would be the sort of top AI suggestions? And actually it's Cunha first, then Wisa, then Wood. And I think it makes sense, but I still think a home game versus Leicester, I feel like Wood probably is actually the best pick standalone for this week. But then after this, maybe it is someone like, let's say, Cunha, who is outright better, or someone like Wisa, for example, who brings all the guarantees except for penalties. And so that's the main thing that's quite interesting right now. Cunha is someone who might be a good blend of the two, maybe slightly averager fixtures, I would say, but then is arguably the better player because he's on penalty still. Underlying data is quite strong, quite creative as a player. So we know that the bonus sort of metrics for Cunha are really positive. It's not just about his sort of goal threat, whereas Wisa's pure goal threat, and we know goal threat has been amazing this season for FPL when it comes to bonus points for players. And so with Wood, the last thing is the XG per 90 has always been poor, I think, but the fixtures are there for the first time in a while, and his ownership's not particularly high. And I'm sure actually a lot of people are dissatisfied with Wood too, because he just simply hasn't been performing. And so with my general approach, it's not like I think Wood is suddenly a bad pick now. I think I've always held him as a solid to average pick. And in this context, he actually is a really good pick because the fixtures are there. So interestingly, that makes me like the idea of Wood, but I can't really say no to any of these options. I think they're all really, really strong. If we suddenly get a leak that Marmoush is suddenly benched versus Southampton, which could happen because whilst I think he's still roughly first choice within the team, there's a propensity for Pep to actually rotate here versus Southampton. I think in the past we have seen Pep sort of be a little bit disrespectful towards teams. Like if he sees a team like Southampton, like Leicester or Ipswich, I think he probably sees that as a potential game to maybe play an additional attacker within a certain structure, or maybe even play a different structure where he can rotate a little bit more than he ever would if he was taking an opponent seriously. And I think unfortunately that's the sort of level that these teams have produced where Pep might actually consider that, and we might get a leak by the deadline that one of these players like a Marmoush could be benched. I have no interest in KDB, but I think a lot of other people might have a midfielder that they want to sell, and I completely understand going for KDB. I feel like if you get a KDB starts league, it's so easy to move towards KDB, and even easier to actually captain him as well, even over someone like Mbumo. But that's not the position that I'm in. I think I'm simply looking for a transfer. I haven't really made my mind in terms of the transfer in, because as we can see sort of from the sort of expected points metrics from the AI transfer suggestions, neither of these options are generally bad, right? I think week to week going forwards, especially if we think that Marmoush's minutes are going to be, a little bit suspect, I could really move into any of these options with no issues. And so I would like to just go Wood because I really like targeting Leicester at home. Nothing wrong with going for any of the picks. I feel like most of the direction of ownership has gone towards Wisa and Cunha. So maybe that's part of the, I guess, reason why I'm quite interested and still intrigued with the idea of going for Wood at this moment in time. And the penalties are always there. Plus his minutes still look really good. They've been struggling to score goals. We usually tend to see Wood get subbed off in games where they might have a positive game state, and so Wood is a little bit impervious, I guess, to having bad outcomes when it comes to minutes, because if they need to chase, it's more than likely that Wood stays on the pitch. So nothing really, I think, separating all these picks when it comes to minutes. Cunha also tends to get subbed off a little bit earlier sometimes to allow for other players to play, but that's also, I think, if they have a nice little game state, or of course maybe like, let's say, within the context of the City game, I suppose it's still an opportunity to play fresh legs for Pereira, but Cunha will play at least 80 minutes within the game. So that's kind of what I see for this week. I think it's only the Marmoush move, but let's say if Marmoush is fine, the transfer plans I think are quite linear. So on 37, I think this is actually another week where I can rotate once again. If I actually look at my team, I'm actually quite happy still playing that sort of 50-50 with Cliver and Evan Nilsson. I think I just play Evan Nilsson. If Marmoush is fine, hopefully he's fine, I can keep him in my team, or it might be the case that I use a free transfer towards him. But having said, I would have rolled at least one free transfer, so I go towards Gameweek 38 with 2 free transfers. And so when I look at the team on 37, it's actually very, very strong. Yes, I'm maybe playing Ait Nuri versus Eze. I think I could switch things around and actually go Nico Williams and play him over Ait Nuri. This way, I don't think I lose too much in terms of sort of expected points, but I actually probably increase the range of outcomes that I have that are positive for my team. And that's kind of the rough plan that I have in my mind. On Game Week 38, however, I think the interesting thing is that this is where I would like to sell some of my players. I think this is a good opportunity, clearly, to play clever. But I think Eze can go and Palmer can go. And I think the most simple double transfer that I can think of is actually just simply going for Saka and Semenyo. So I'll have 2 million in the bank in this situation. I think all the other fixtures within my team are really, really good. I'm expecting, hopefully at this point in the season, that maybe Marmoush's minutes are a little bit reduced, so it makes it a little bit of an easier decision to sort of bench him. But I won't need my third striker within that week. And that's kind of the rough plan. I think this is a really strong team to close out the season. Most of the team with home games are at least targeting some of these relegation teams. And, you know, you can't really complain, I think, in this circumstance. And once again, Salah looks like a really strong pick for Game Week 38. Now, you know, taking a bit of a step back, I suppose in the circumstance that I don't need to make a transfer, let's say on a Game Week 37 potentially, or even a Game Week 36, clearly I would have 3 moves left until the end of the season. So I think this idea of, you know, taking a step back, going back to Game Week 36 here, maybe binning off Isak is not the craziest thing, because once again, it allows me to bin off some of the ownership. If I know that Marmoush starts, this is something that I am considering, not because I think it's good FPL play per se when it comes to sort of maximizing points, but in terms of maximizing, I think, the possibilities for me to get, you know, crazier gains, I suppose, or equally crazier losses at a stage of the season where I do want to sort of get as high a rank as possible if I can get it. Maybe selling Isak on 36 is not the craziest thing. And so I'm once again facing all the suggestions as previous, but then also Watkins comes into the equation, and Watkins actually has 2 really good fixtures to close out the season. And I suppose also, you know, he is someone who is once again motivated to play all these games up until the end. What I don't like about Watkins so much is that substitution for Malin in the previous match. That's not a positive sign in terms of Watkins's minutes outlook as well. The penalty piece is interesting because I suppose if Asensio doesn't play all the minutes, maybe you actually have slightly higher pen share for someone like Watkins, where, you know, in a world where Rashford was playing as well and good competition, maybe it was actually tougher for Watkins to sort of get better pen share. But that is somewhat there. I don't love Watkins too much, so I don't think I'm going to go there. He really would have only been considered as an option if we actually had double Game Week 36. And as of right now, we know that that's fully confirmed to be, you know, non-existent. The Aston Villa versus Tottenham game is going to be rescheduled towards a Friday, which means that it's not going to change whether we have a blank Game Week 36, or rather, sorry, a blank Game Week 37 or a double Game Week 36. So we know that we have no more doubles, no more blanks for the rest of the season, which I think in my condition, you know, without a free hit, that makes sense. That's nice. But that's sort of my thoughts, right? Maybe we can use a transfer towards Isak if Marmoush is fine, just so that I can actually spend the rest of the season, I guess, not having to make too many, I guess, safer picks so that I can reduce my range of outcomes. The only reason why I want to keep Salah is because I just don't think there's a good enough replacement that replaces him, you know, for the sort of expected value loss. And of course, he's going to be my captain in Game Week 38, I feel, because he's the standout pick there. And that's pretty much it in terms of my thoughts for transfer plans. The alternative transfer plan, as I mentioned for, you know, at the start of the video, is it with players that I feel have slightly worse defenses than myself. It's actually a pretty good opportunity to generally consider going for, you know, the stacking of the Nottingham Forest defense. It didn't really work out for me last week when I went Everton versus Ipswich at home. But, you know, if I can give a little bit of credit towards Ipswich, they're a lot better than Leicester. And Nottingham Forest are still a very, very strong defensive team. So a good opportunity, I think, once again, to target these Nottingham Forest defenders who are also now, you know, scoring goals, being a huge part of the, you know, both ends of the pitch for Forest. And so that could be quite fun to do. But that's sort of my thoughts in terms of my transfer plans. As I said, the plan, generally speaking, is to get towards Game Week 38, probably make those Semenyo and not Salah moves, but rather the Saka move, and then to actually just generally have a free transfer flexible to, you know, whatever I really want to do over the next 2 weeks, whether it's maybe, you know, targeting, let's say, a striker in the future if Marmoush's minutes look precarious, or simply we know that there's going to be rotation Game Week 38. If we get leaks on Game Week 38, it might be a bit of a pro for me to be able to use that free transfer depending on any sort of crazy news that we actually get, and any injuries, of course, that I could suffer over the next 3 weeks. So those are my thoughts in terms of my transfer plans. I hope you guys have a wonderful week ahead. See you guys soon. Take care and goodbye.